Hi, I'm Sally. I'm here to help you put together a trip itinerary. So this video is for people who've already identified an idea for a trip, maybe a single destination or a region. I'm going to walk you through my method of turning that one idea into an entire itinerary. So if you haven't landed on that one idea yet, then just back up and watch my video on brainstorming and then my video on narrowing your ideas down to a single one. So first step, set up a Google Sheet. Google Doc, maybe, if you prefer. You can access both of these offline from your phone when you're traveling. So list the dates that you're going to be away for. The second column is going to say what town or city you're in that day, or if you're traveling, what city you're starting from and ending up in. The next column will set out any further information about activities that day, maybe restaurant bookings, the name of a museum you really want to visit that day. The third column is for transportation. I have a separate video on booking transportation, just leave this blank for now. The next one will be titled Sleeping Tonight In. This is important. You do not want to get confused about whether the booking you make is for the night before or the night after. So once we get to the booking stage, we'll put in the name of the hotel here. So make some additional columns here for check-in time, check-out time, luggage storage information, whether breakfast is offered at the hotel, etc. And now we're ready to start populating the first couple of columns. Don't worry about booking right now. So first, fill in your first and last day to reflect your flight departure and arrival times. Make sure to factor in the time change and whether it's an overnight flight. Write down the name of the city that you'll be sleeping in that first night. So you already have the very beginning and the very end of your trip plan now. You just need to fill in the middle. Now, if there's a specific event or something else you're really wanting to go to, make sure you write that in now so that we can work around it. So the next step is to look at some suggested itineraries in guidebooks, on blogs, tour operator websites. These are all inspiration. If you're not renting a car, make sure that you look at itineraries that use public transportation. Intrepid Travel has some itineraries on there that do, so that's a great starting point. Guidebooks also, they have usually multiple itineraries listed. You can use pieces of those and then build on them. Personally, I like to slow it down a little bit more than those itineraries so that I'm spending at least 3 nights in big cities, but as many as maybe 5 or 6. Smaller towns, I find 2 is enough. Some of the guidebooks suggest covering a huge amount of area, which means spending half your time in transportation because there's such long distances. For me, that's too much. I prefer to just take a piece of those suggested itineraries and then add some more stops so that the distances between are shorter and I'm spending more time on the ground and less time in buses and trains. The other advantage is that way you get to see maybe some places that are a little bit more off the beaten track versus the itineraries that are usually consist of places where almost everybody goes. When you're figuring out a sequence of places to visit, look at Google Maps to get familiar with the region, but don't assume that a bunch of locations in a string will actually make sense to visit consecutively. If you're relying on public transportation, it might turn out that the string of places isn't actually very well connected together at all. So early on, see if you can take a look at the map of train routes or bus routes. You might find out that certain cities or towns are bypassed by those routes, or that the train takes a more winding route than you might have guessed. Since you'll be relying on those modes of transportation to get around, design your itinerary in a way that follows their routes. This will just be so much easier and more streamlined. And if you really prefer trains over buses, this will allow you to maximize train infrastructure and avoid those buses. So obviously, if you're renting a car, None of that matters to you, but you do want to look at the highway systems instead. If there's a place you're interested in and it's not clear whether there's an easy transportation link, use Rome to Rio. That's the number 2 in between. That website will give you the options for connecting any 2 places. So here's an example. This website will help you aim for an itinerary with minimal layovers and transfers. Rome to Rio is pretty comprehensive, though not necessarily 100%. Don't worry about booking any transportation just yet. Just use this website as a resource for planning for now. So now that you've had a look at the region and at the train or bus maps, start plotting out your route and deciding how many nights to stay at each place. As you're looking at maps, don't be afraid to Google those random cities and towns that seem to be within easy reach of each other. You never know what you're going to find. It might be something really interesting. As you go, start to populate your boxes. Make sure to consider the time you'll be spending moving on to the next place. Assume that on a day you need to travel, you won't have much time for sightseeing. You'll be packing, getting to the train station or the bus station, taking the train or the bus, finding your next accommodation, checking in, getting settled in. These things do take time, especially when you're in a foreign country where you're sort of having to figure things out on the go and everything's different. Plus, you can often only check in so early. You don't want to arrive way beforehand when you're going to be just stuck with your suitcases. Because of that, I really recommend spending at least 2 nights in every place. I avoid doing sort of stopover visits, except for where I think it really makes sense. But if you do, make sure that there's luggage storage either at the train station or the bus station or the tourist center. And make sure that the luggage storage is actually going to be open when you arrive and when you leave. If you're planning on taking long distance trains as part of your itinerary, start thinking about that now. Check with the man in seat 61. That's an awesome resource. It's going to let you know whether the train will be operating during the dates that you have in mind and other information you might want before you decide to go on that route. If you are new to planning trips, one of the easiest, most straightforward ways to plan a trip is look at the map, choose 2 cities that are, maybe a few hundred kilometers apart and that both have an international airport. Fly into one and fly out of the other. Then pick some places in between that are linked by public transportation, and boom, that's your itinerary. It's that simple. You don't need to be overwhelmed by this. You can do this. Make sure to not get too carried away and try to include everything. I know it's so tempting, but don't forget that if you do find you're allotted too much time to a certain place, you can always do day trips, which is a really nice idea, because then you don't have to pick up your stuff and slog along to the next hotel. You don't need to research everything about the places you're going to visit. Sometimes the surprise is half the fun. Just have a quick look at what sorts of things are there, maybe a glance at a guidebook, and choose the number of nights that you think you need to cover those things. Personally, I like to choose a mix of cities and towns and a mix of really famous sort of touristy iconic places and more unknown places that are going to give me a sense of what everyday life is actually like in that country. I also like to mix up the types of activities I'm doing, maybe a few days on a beach and then somewhere more urban, and then doing some hiking. So once you've settled on an itinerary and filled in this first column or two, do 2 things. First, make sure your Google Doc is available offline. Then watch my next video for advice about how to start booking accommodation and my video about booking transportation.